The UAP Herald, Case File 004, the FBI's UFO file. It is the most downloaded document the Federal Bureau of Investigation has ever released. One typed page. It says that 3 flying saucers were recovered in New Mexico, each one carrying 3 bodies of human shape but only 3 feet tall. Millions of people have read it as proof that the government knows. Almost none of them have read the rest of the file it lives in. We did. The whole file. Bureau number 62-HQ-83894. And the file tells you exactly where that story came from and why the Bureau itself never believed a word of it. This is not a story about whether sources are real. It is a story about a single, authentic government document and what happens when you actually read past the famous part. To understand the famous memo, you have to start 3 years earlier with the file itself. In the summer of 1947, the Bureau opens a folder marked Flying Discs. It will grow for years, stamped Do Not Destroy. It begins, like the whole phenomenon begins, with a man named Kenneth Arnold. On the 24th of June, 1947, Arnold, a private pilot, reports 9 objects moving fast near Mount Rainier. A newspaper turns his description into 2 words that never go away: flying saucers. Within weeks, the country is seeing them everywhere, and citizen letters start arriving at FBI field offices by the sackful. And here is the texture of the file that nobody remembers. From the very first summer, most of the recovered discs the Bureau actually looks at turn out to be nothing. A circular saw blade planted in a Wisconsin churchyard. A disc that turns out to be a painted Gulf oil sign, cardboard, tin, and a buzzer. Page after page, the Bureau's own default finding is prank. The director himself is in the file. On the 5th of August 1947, J. Edgar Hoover writes to the War Department about the discs. The Bureau and the military agree on a division of labor that will define everything that follows. The Air Force studies the objects. The FBI helps run down the hoaxes. But one case in that first summer was not a prank, and it is the darkest chapter in the file. Maury Island, Puget Sound, the 21st of June, 1947. A man named Harold Dahl claims that 6 donut-shaped craft appeared over his boat, and that one of them rained down a hot, slag-like material that killed his dog and burned his son. His business partner, Fred Crisman, backs the story. The Army Air Forces send 2 of their best counterintelligence officers to investigate, Captain William Davidson and First Lieutenant Frank Brown. They interview the men. They collect samples of the strange material, and they load it onto a B-25 bomber to fly it back for analysis. On the 1st of August, 1947, that bomber catches fire over Washington State and crashes near Kelso. Davidson and Brown are both killed. 2 other men parachute to safety. The samples are lost in the wreck. 2 intelligence officers dead, carrying physical evidence from a flying saucer case. You can see, immediately, why this became the seed of half a century of conspiracy theories. The deaths, the lost evidence, the mysterious cargo, and then the file does the thing it keeps doing. The investigator's own report notes that Dahl's boat showed none of the damage the story required, that no newspaper had reported giant daylight craft over a populated sound. The officer on the scene came to suspect the whole thing was a hoax, and within weeks, Dahl and Crisman were reportedly admitting as much. 2 men died. That is real, and it is a tragedy. Whether they died for a real flying saucer is a different question, and the file leans hard toward no. Which brings us to the most underrated document in the entire file, because once, just once in these years, the Bureau got to put a flying saucer under a microscope. In 1948, the Air Force's first official UFO study, Project Sign, sent the FBI laboratory a soil sample. It came from a spot where a saucer had supposedly touched down and left a depression in the ground. The request was simple: examine it for anything unusual. The Bureau did the work properly: petrographic and microscopic analysis. They checked the sample for exotic metals or alloys, for evidence of intense heat, and for radioactivity. On the 7th of October, 1948, the reply went back over the director's own signature.
Nothing unusual was noted on the pebbles or in the sand and dirt that would indicate a metallic object had rubbed or scraped against this sample, nor was there any indication of extreme heat or the presence of radioactive substances.
Pebbles, sand, and dirt. Ordinary terrain. Pair that with the Bureau's formal position set down in February of 1948. The FBI is conducting no investigations concerning flying discs. It only exchanges information with the Air Force. The posture is now complete. File it. If asked, maybe test it. Then hand it to the Air Force. And yet the file makes clear the Bureau kept receiving reports it could not dismiss as pranks. In Portland, Oregon, in 1947, multiple police officers, men trained to observe, reported disc-shaped objects over the city on the same day. In Alaska, a commercial DC-3 crew described being paced by an object near Bethel. These are not saw blades in a churchyard. They are credible people, on the record, describing things they couldn't explain. The file holds both kinds of report at once and treats them the same way. Write it down, hand it up. By the early 1950s, that handling has hardened into a standing rule. The Bureau's reply to saucer reports becomes a near-form letter, not within the jurisdiction of this Bureau, and the matter is referred to the Air Force. And the Air Force, in its own candid moments, admitted it was getting nowhere. One briefing in the file concedes the investigators had failed to arrive at any conclusion at all. So hold that fact, because it matters for everything that comes next. The one time the FBI actually examined the physical material of a saucer, it got dirt, and the institution best placed to explain the rest was, by its own admission, stumped. March 22nd, 1950. The head of the FBI's Washington Field Office, Special Agent in Charge Guy Hottel, types a short memorandum to Director Hoover. 4 sentences. This is the document the whole world would eventually read.
3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. They were described as being circular in shape, with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to the blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots.
And then the explanation the memo offers for how 3 saucers ended up on the ground.
The saucers were found in New Mexico due to the fact that the government has a very high-powered radar setup in that area, and it is believed the radar interferes with the controlling mechanism of the saucers.
That is the famous part. Recovered craft, small bodies, a government radar that knocks saucers out of the sky. It is everything a believer could want, on real FBI letterhead. Now read the part nobody quotes. The memo's own opening tells you where Hottel got this. It did not come from an FBI investigation. It came to him second-hand, relayed by a Washington police investigator, passed through another agent, and onto Hottel's desk. It is, by the document's own account, a rumor about a rumor before it is ever typed, and the Bureau's response to this explosive report of recovered alien craft, there was none. No agents dispatched, no New Mexico site, no bodies, no metal, no chain of custody, anywhere in the file. The memo closes the way so much of this file closes.
No further action desired.
Before the ink is dry, this is already a rumor about a rumor, and the FBI filed it without checking. Here is what makes this file remarkable. It does not just contain the rumor, it contains the rumor's origin, and the origin is a con. Start with the timing. 13 days before Hottel typed his memo on the 9th of March 1950, the FBI's Denver office logged a nearly identical story. A University of Denver lecturer had told an audience that flying saucers had come down in New Mexico, that the occupants were about 3 feet tall, and that they were dead. The lecturer's information traced to a local man named George Kohler. Hoover's reaction to the Denver report was the same as always. No further action desired. The same story, in 2 cities, in the same month. So where was it actually coming from? It was coming from 2 men. Silas Newton, a flamboyant Denver oil promoter who liked to be called Mr. X, and his partner, a man who went by Dr. G, whose real name was Leo GeBauer. Newton and GeBauer were the source of the so-called Aztec, New Mexico incident of 1948, a tale of a crashed saucer recovered intact with small dead occupants inside. In substance, this was Newton's pitch, as it was later recounted in print.
The ships came down near Aztec, intact. The little men inside were burned. But the craft was made of a metal harder than anything on Earth, and it ran on magnetic lines of force.
That story became a 1950 bestseller. The Variety columnist Frank Scully published it as fact in a book called Behind the Flying Saucers. For a while, it was the most famous flying saucer story in America, and it was built entirely on the word of Silas Newton. But Newton and GeBauer were not really in the saucer business. They were in the oil business, or rather, the oil fraud business. Their product was a device they called the Doodlebug, a sealed box they claimed used alien-derived technology to detect oil and minerals underground. Investors paid enormous sums for it. When the box was finally opened, it was found to contain ordinary war surplus radio parts worth a few dollars. The man who took the whole thing apart was a journalist named J.P. Cahn. Working for True magazine, Cahn investigated Newton's claims and got hold of a piece of the unearthly saucer metal Newton had been showing around.
I had the metal tested. It melted like an ordinary skillet. There was nothing alien about it. The whole thing was a hoax.
Cahn published his exposé in True in 1952, and in 1953 the courts caught up with the con itself. Silas Newton and Leo GeBauer were convicted of fraud over the Doodlebug scheme. Note what put them in court. Not the saucer stories, but the worthless device they sold as alien technology. Now look at how thickly this rumor was already circulating. In a span of about 3 weeks in March of 1950, the file collects at least 4 near-identical reports of small, dead occupants and intact, recovered craft in the Southwest. The Denver lecturer on the 9th, the Hottel Memo on the 22nd, a version tied to the Newton Circle on the 31st, and others around them. The same con, echoing back to the Bureau from several directions at once, which is exactly why a careful reader shouldn't trust any single retelling of the chain. There are in fact 2 versions of how it reached Hottel. The memo's own account names a Washington police investigator. Outside researchers reconstruct a different route through a Kansas City informant named Rudy Fick and an Air Force intelligence office. Both versions end in the same place, an unverified rumor of hoax origin. When the FBI's Denver office had earlier checked the source, an Air Force intelligence assessment of the man spreading it was blunt, a probable mental case. So follow the thread. The Aztec hoax of 1948, run by 2 men, later convicted of fraud, becomes Scully's 1950 book, gets exposed by Cahn in 1952, and somewhere in that same rumor cloud, in March of 1950, a version of it lands on Guy Hottel's desk and onto FBI letterhead. And we don't even have to draw that conclusion ourselves. The Bureau's own analysts did. In a confidential intelligence briefing dated the 19th of May, 1950, they assessed the wave of recovered saucer and little men reports directly. Their written verdict was 2 words: sheer fabrication. So let's hold both walls at once, because this is the whole point. The Hottel Memo is completely authentic. It is a genuine 1950 FBI document, written by a real official sitting in a real file. On that, there is no argument, and the Hottel Memo proves nothing. It says 3 saucers and 9 bodies were recovered. What it actually demonstrates is that a field office chief once relayed a second-hand rumor onto Bureau letterhead, a rumor the FBI never investigated, that traces to a hoax run by 2 men convicted of fraud, and that the Bureau's own analysts dismissed as fabrication. The FBI knows this. The vault page that hosts the memo today carries the Bureau's own caution. The document records a claim that was never investigated, and it does not prove the existence of UFOs. 2 more things the file makes clear because they are the myths that refuse to die. First, the FBI confirmed recovered sources is false. The FBI confirmed nothing. It filed a rumor. And second, this memo has nothing whatsoever to do with Roswell. They are different years, different states, different stories, joined only by the human wish to connect them. The real lesson here isn't about sources at all. It is that a document can be completely authentic and completely unreliable at the same time. A government letterhead is not a fact check, and the most downloaded UFO file in the world is, in the end, a careful record of a story that wasn't true. The record in order. 1947. The file opens: Arnold sighting, the hoax wave, Maury Island, and the fatal B-25 crash. 1948. The Aztec hoax begins, and the FBI lab tests a saucer sample and finds ordinary dirt. December 1949. The Air Force closes its study, Project Grudge. The 9th of March, 1950. The Denver lecturer. The 22nd of March, the Hottel Memo. The 19th of May, the Bureau's own analysts write sheer fabrication. Later that year, Scully's book. 1952, Cahn's expose in True. 1953, Newton and GeBauer convicted of fraud. And 2011, the memo goes up on the FBI vault and becomes the most viewed file the Bureau has. What we know: the FBI's UFO file is genuine and decades deep. Most of the early recoveries were hoaxes. 2 officers really died in the Maury Island B-25 crash. Hoover's own lab tested a sample and found ordinary dirt. The Hottel Memo is authentic, and it relays a second-hand rumor the FBI never investigated. That rumor traces to the Aztec hoax, run by Newton and GeBauer, convicted of fraud in 1953 and exposed by J.P. Cahn. And the Bureau's own analysts called the Little Men reports sheer fabrication. What we don't know: whether there was ever a single real eyewitness behind the rumor, the exact hand-to-hand path it took onto Hottel's desk, and why this document, of all the files the FBI has ever released, became the one the public chose to believe. A real file, a real memo, an unverified rumor, a proven con, and a fraud conviction, all inside the most downloaded UFO document the FBI has ever released. Case File 004, the FBI's UFO file, is completely authentic, and it proves nothing. Filed. The UAP Herald, every document read, every claim cross-referenced, AI investigated and filed. Subscribe. The file stays open.